Very sure that you choose for your group only those who will be in complete sympathy and harmony with your purpose. Close friends and relatives, while not meaning to do so, often handicap one through opinions. And for some reason, even friends often seem to think that ridiculing you and your plans is funny. Thousands of men and women carry inferiority complexes with them all through life because some well-meaning but ignorant person destroyed their confidence through opinions or ridicule. You have a brain and mind of your own. Use it and reach your own decisions. If you need facts or information from others to help you reach decisions, acquire the facts or information you need quietly, without disclosing your purpose. It is characteristic of people who have a smattering of knowledge to try to give the impression that they know more than they do. Such people generally do too much talking and too little listening. Keep your eyes and ears open and your mouth closed if you wish to acquire the habit of prompt decision. Those who talk too much do little else. If you talk more than you listen, you may miss some important piece of knowledge that might have been very useful to you. By talking too much, you may also disclose your plans and purposes to people who will take great delight in defeating you because they envy you. Remember, every time you open your mouth in the presence of a person who really has knowledge, you tip your hand and show that person your exact stock of knowledge, or you tip your hand to your lack of it. The mark of genuine wisdom is modesty and silence. Keep in mind that every person is, like you, seeking the opportunity to accumulate money. If you talk about your plans too freely, you may be surprised when you learn that some other person has beat you to it by using the plans you bragged about. Let one of your first decisions be to keep a closed mouth and open ears and eyes. As a reminder to yourself, copy the following epigram in large letters and place it where you will see it daily. Tell the world what you intend to do, but first, show it. This is the equivalent of saying that deeds and not words are what count most. The value of decisions depends upon the courage required to render them. The great decisions that served as the foundation of civilization were reached by assuming great risks, which often meant the chance of death. Lincoln's decision to issue his famous Proclamation of Emancipation, which gave freedom to African Americans, was rendered with full understanding that his act would turn thousands of friends and political supporters against him. When the rulers of Athens gave Socrates the choice of disclaiming his teachings or being sentenced to death, Socrates' decision to drink the cup of poison, rather than compromise in his personal belief, was a decision of courage. It turned time ahead 1,000 years and gave to people then unborn the right to freedom of thought and of speech. 56. Who risked the gallows? The greatest decision of all time, as far as any American citizen is concerned, was reached in Philadelphia on July 4, 1776, when 56 men signed their names to a document that they well knew would bring freedom to all Americans, or leave every one of the 56 hanging from a gallows. You have heard of this famous document, the Declaration of Independence. But have you taken from it the great lesson in personal achievement it so plainly taught? We all remember the date of this momentous decision, but few of us realize what courage that decision required. We remember our history as it was taught. We remember dates and the names of the men who fought. We remember Valley Forge and Yorktown. We remember George Washington and Lord Cornwallis. But we know little of the real forces behind these names, dates, and places. We know even less of that intangible power that ensured freedom long before Washington's armies reached Yorktown. It is nothing short of tragedy that the writers of history have missed entirely even the slightest reference to the irresistible power that gave birth and freedom to the nation destined to set up new standards of independence for all the peoples of the earth. I say it is a tragedy because it is the same power that must be used by every individual who overcomes the difficulties of life and forces life to pay the price asked. Let us briefly review the events that gave birth to this power. The story begins with an incident in Boston on March 5, 1770. British soldiers were patrolling the streets, openly threatening the citizens by their presence. The colonists resented armed men marching in their midst. They began to express their resentment openly, hurling stones as well as epithets at the marching soldiers, until the commanding officer gave orders. Fix bayonets, charge. The battle was on. It resulted in the death and injury of many. The incident aroused such resentment that the Provincial Assembly, made up of prominent colonists, called a meeting for the purpose of taking definite action. Two of the members of that assembly were John Hancock and Samuel Adams. They spoke up courageously and declared that a move must be made to eject all British soldiers from Boston. Remember this: a decision, in the minds of two men, might properly be called the beginning of the freedom that we of the United States now enjoy. Remember, too, that the decision of these two men called for faith and courage because it was dangerous. Before the assembly adjourned, Samuel Adams was appointed to call on Hutchinson, the governor of the province, and demand the withdrawal of the British troops. The request was granted, and the troops were removed from Boston, but the incident was not closed. It had caused a situation that was destined to change the entire trend of civilization. Richard Henry Lee became an important factor in this story, because he and Samuel Adams corresponded frequently, sharing freely their fears and their hopes concerning the welfare of the people of their provinces. From this practice, Adams conceived the idea that a mutual exchange of letters between the 13 colonies might help to bring about the coordination of efforts so badly needed in connection with the solution of their problems. In March of 1772, 2 years after the clash with the soldiers in Boston, Adams presented this idea to the Assembly. He made a motion that a correspondence committee be established among the colonies, with definitely appointed correspondents in each colony, for the purpose of friendly cooperation for the betterment of the colonies of British America. It was the beginning of the organization of the far-flung power destined to give freedom to you and to me. A mastermind group had already been organized. It consisted of Adams, Lee, and Hancock. The Committee of Correspondence was organized. The citizens of the colonies had been waging disorganized warfare against the British soldiers through incidents similar to the Boston riot, but nothing of benefit had been accomplished. Their individual grievances had not been consolidated under one mastermind. No group of individuals had put their hearts, minds, souls, and bodies together in one definite decision to settle their difficulty with the British once and for all, until Adams, Hancock, and Lee got together. Meanwhile, the British were not idle. They too were doing some planning and masterminding, and they had the advantage of having behind them money and organized soldiery. A decision that changed history. The Crown appointed Gage to supplant Hutchinson as the governor of Massachusetts. One of the new governor's first acts was to send a messenger to call on Samuel Adams for the purpose of endeavoring to stop his opposition by fear. You will best understand the spirit of what happened from this quotation of the conversation between Colonel Fenton, the messenger sent by Gage, and Adams. Colonel Fenton: I have been authorized by Governor Gage to assure you, Mr. Adams, that the governor has been empowered to confer upon you such benefits as would be satisfactory, an obvious endeavor to win Adams by promise of bribing him, upon the condition that you engage to cease in your opposition to the measures of the government. It is the governor's advice to you, sir, not to incur the further displeasure of His Majesty. Your conduct has been such as makes you liable to penalties of an act of Henry VIII, by which persons can be sent to England for trial for treason or misprision of treason at the discretion of a governor of a province. But by changing your political course, you will not only receive great personal advantages, but you will make your peace with the king. Samuel Adams had the choice of two decisions. He could cease his opposition and receive personal bribes, or he could continue and run the risk of being hanged. Clearly, the time had come when Adams was forced to reach, instantly, a decision that could have cost his life. Adams insisted upon Colonel Fenton's word of honor that the colonel would deliver to the governor the answer exactly as Adams would give it to him. Adams' answer: "Then you may tell Governor Gage that I trust I have long since made my peace with the King of Kings. No personal consideration shall induce me to abandon the righteous cause of my country. And tell Governor Gage it is the advice of Samuel Adams to him no longer to insult the feelings of an exasperated people." When Governor Gage received Adams' caustic reply, he flew into a rage and issued a proclamation that read, "I do hereby, in His Majesty's name, offer and promise His most gracious pardon to all persons who shall forthwith lay down their arms and return to the duties of peaceable subjects, excepting only from the benefit of such pardon Samuel Adams and John Hancock, whose offenses are of too flagitious a nature to admit of any other consideration but that of condign punishment." Adams and Hancock were on the spot. The threat of the irate governor forced the two men to reach another decision, equally as dangerous. They hurriedly called a secret meeting of their staunchest followers. After the meeting had been called to order, Adams locked the door, placed the key in his pocket, and informed all present that it was imperative that a Congress of the colonists be organized, and that no man should leave the room until the decision for such a Congress had been reached. Great excitement followed. Some weighed the possible consequences of such radicalism. Some expressed grave doubt as to the wisdom of so definite a decision in defiance of the Crown. Locked in that room were two men immune to fear, blind to the possibility of failure: Hancock and Adams. Through the influence of their minds, the others were induced to agree that, through the Correspondence Committee, arrangements should be made for a meeting of the First Continental Congress to be held in Philadelphia, September 5th, 1774. Remember this date. It is more important than July 4th, 1776. If there had been no decision to hold a Continental Congress, there could have been no signing of the Declaration of Independence. Before the first meeting of the new Congress, another leader, in a different section of the country, was deep in the throes of publishing a summary view of the rights of British America. He was Thomas Jefferson, of the province of Virginia, whose relationship to Lord Dunmore, representative of the Crown in Virginia, was as strained as that of Hancock's and Adams with their governor. Shortly after his famous Summary of Rights was published, Jefferson was informed that he was subject to prosecution for high treason against His Majesty's government. Inspired by the threat, one of Jefferson's colleagues, Patrick Henry, boldly spoke his mind, concluding his remarks with a sentence that shall remain forever a classic: "If this be treason, then make the most of it." It was such men as these who, without power, without authority, without military strength, without money, sat in solemn consideration of the destiny of the colonies, beginning at the opening of the First Continental Congress and continuing at intervals for 2 years, until on June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee arose, addressed the chair, and to the startled assembly made this motion: "Gentlemen, I make the motion that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they be absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved." The most momentous decision ever placed on paper. Lee's astounding motion was discussed fervently and at such length that he began to lose patience. Finally, after days of argument, he again took the floor and declared in a clear, firm voice, "Mr. President, we have discussed this issue for days. It is the only course for us to follow. Why then, sir, do we longer delay? Why still deliberate? Let this happy day give birth to an American republic. Let her arise, not to devastate and to conquer, but to re-establish the reign of peace and of law." Before his motion was finally voted upon, Lee was called back to Virginia because of serious family illness. But before leaving, he placed his cause in the hands of his friend, Thomas Jefferson, who promised to fight until favorable action was taken. Shortly thereafter, the President of the Congress, Hancock, appointed Jefferson as chairman of a committee to draw up a Declaration of Independence. Long and hard, the committee labored on a document that would mean, when accepted by the Congress, that every man who signed it would be signing his own death warrant should the colonies lose in the fight with Great Britain that was sure to follow. The document was drawn, and on June 28th, the original draft was read before the Congress. For several days it was discussed, altered, and made ready. On July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson stood before the Assembly and fearlessly read the most momentous decision ever placed on paper. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. When Jefferson finished, the document was voted upon, accepted, and signed by the 56 men, every one staking his own life upon his decision to write his name. By that decision came into existence a nation destined to bring to mankind forever the privilege of making decisions. Analyze the events that led to the Declaration of Independence, and be convinced that this nation, which now holds a position of commanding respect and power among all nations of the world, was born of a decision created by a mastermind consisting of 56 men. Note well the fact that it was their decision that ensured the success of Washington's armies, because the spirit of that decision was in the heart of every soldier who fought with him, and served as a spiritual power which recognizes no such thing as failure. Note also, with great personal benefit, that the power that gave this nation its freedom is the same power that must be used by every individual who becomes self-determining. This power is made up of the principles described in this book. It will not be difficult to detect in the story of the Declaration of Independence at least 6 of these principles: desire, decision, faith, persistence, the mastermind, and organized planning. Know what you want, and you will generally get it. Throughout this philosophy, you will find the suggestion that thought, backed by strong desire, will transmute itself into its physical equivalent. The story of the founding of America and the story of the organization of the United States Steel Corporation are perfect examples of the method by which thought makes this astounding transformation. In your search for the secret of the method, do not look for a miracle, because you will not find it. You will find only the eternal laws of nature. These laws are available to every person who has the faith and the courage to use them. They may be used to bring freedom to a nation or to accumulate riches. Those who reach decisions promptly and definitely know what they want and generally get it. The leaders in every walk of life decide quickly and firmly. That is the major reason why they are leaders. The world has a habit of making room for the people whose words and actions show that they know where they are going. Indecision is a habit that usually begins when a person is young. It becomes more and more of a habit as the youth goes through grade school, high school, and even through college without definiteness of purpose. The habit of indecision goes with the student into the occupation he or she chooses. Generally, a young person just out of school seeks any job that can be found. Young people take the first job they can find because they have fallen into the habit of indecision. The vast majority of people working today are in the positions they hold because they lack the definiteness of decision to plan a definite position and the knowledge of how to choose an employer. Definiteness of decision always requires courage, sometimes very great courage. The 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence staked their lives on the decision to affix their signatures to that document. The person who reaches a definite decision to go after a specific job and make life pay the price he or she asks does not stake his or her life on that decision. They stake their economic freedom. Financial independence, riches, and desirable business positions are not within reach of the person who neglects or refuses to expect, plan, and demand these things. The person who desires riches in the same spirit that Samuel Adams desired freedom for the colonies is sure to accumulate wealth. No man achieves great success who is unwilling to make personal sacrifices. Chapter 10. Persistence. The sustained effort necessary to induce faith. The 8th step toward riches. Persistence is an essential factor in the procedure of transmuting desire into its monetary equivalent. The basis of persistence is the power of will. Willpower and desire, when properly combined, make an irresistible pair. Those who accumulate great fortunes are sometimes called cold-blooded or ruthless. Frequently, it is simply because their critics simply don't understand that what they have is a strong desire backed up by willpower, which they mix with persistence. It is the combination that ensures the attainment of their objectives. The majority of people are ready to throw their aims and purposes overboard and give up at the first sign of opposition or misfortune. A few carry on despite all opposition until they attain their goal. There may be no heroic connotation to the word persistence, but persistence does for your character what carbon does to iron. It hardens it to steel. The building of a fortune will involve the application of the entire 13 factors of this philosophy. These principles must be understood, and they must be applied with persistence by all who accumulate money. Your test of persistence. If you are reading this book with the intention of seriously applying the knowledge, the first test of your persistence will come when you begin to follow the 6 steps described in the 3rd chapter. Desire. Unless you are one of the few people who already have a definite goal and a definite plan for its attainment, you may read the instructions, but you will never actually apply them in your daily life. Lack of persistence is one of the major causes of failure. Moreover, my experience with thousands of people has proved that lack of persistence is a weakness common to the majority of people. However, it is a weakness that may be overcome by effort. The ease with which lack of persistence may be conquered will depend entirely upon the intensity of your desire. The starting point of all achievement is desire. Keep this constantly in mind. Weak desires bring weak results, just as a small amount of fire makes a small amount of heat. If you are lacking in persistence, this weakness may be remedied by building a stronger fire under your desires. Continue reading through to the end of this book. Then go back to Chapter 3 and start immediately to carry out the instructions for using the 6 steps. The eagerness with which you follow these instructions will indicate clearly how much or how little you really desire to accumulate money. If you find that you are indifferent, you may be sure that you have not yet acquired the money consciousness that you must possess before you can be sure of accumulating a fortune. Fortunes gravitate to those whose minds have been prepared to attract them, just as surely as water gravitates to the ocean. If you are weak in persistence, focus on the instructions in Chapter 11, Power of the Mastermind. Surround yourself with a mastermind group, and through the cooperation of the members of this group, you can develop persistence. You will find additional instructions for the development of persistence in Chapter 5, Autosuggestion, and in Chapter 13, The Subconscious Mind. Follow the instructions in these chapters until you build up habits that convey to your subconscious mind a clear picture of the object of your desire. From that point on, you will not be handicapped by lack of persistence. Your subconscious mind works continuously while you are awake and while you are asleep. Are you money conscious or poverty conscious? Occasional effort to apply the rules will be of no value to you. To get results, you must apply all of the rules until they become a fixed habit with you. In no other way can you develop the necessary money consciousness. Just as money is attracted to those who have deliberately set their mind on it, poverty is attracted to those whose mind is open to it. And although money consciousness must be developed intentionally, poverty consciousness develops without conscious application of habits favorable to it. Poverty consciousness will seize the mind that is not occupied with money consciousness. If you understand the point of the preceding paragraph, you will understand the importance of persistence in the accumulation of a fortune. Without persistence, you will be defeated even before you start. With persistence, you will win. If you have ever had a nightmare, you will realize the value of persistence. You are lying in bed, half awake, with a feeling that you are about to smother. You are unable to turn over or to move a muscle. You realize that you must begin to regain control over your muscles. Through persistent effort of willpower, you finally manage to move the fingers of one hand. By continuing to move your fingers, you extend your control to the muscles of one arm until you can lift it. Then you gain control of the other arm. You finally gain control over the muscles of one leg, and then extend it to the other leg. Then, with one supreme effort of will, you regain complete control over your muscular system and snap out of your nightmare. You did it step by step. You may find it necessary to snap yourself out of your mental inertia in a similar way. First, by moving slowly, then increasing your speed until you gain complete control over your will. Be persistent, no matter how slowly you may have to move at first. With persistence will come success. Snap out of mental inertia. If you select your mastermind group with care, you will have in it at least one person who will aid you in the development of persistence. Some people who have accumulated great fortunes did so because of necessity. They developed the habit of persistence because circumstances forced them to become persistent. Those who have cultivated the habit of persistence seem to enjoy insurance against failure. No matter how many times they are defeated, they finally arrive up toward the top of the ladder. Sometimes it appears that there is a hidden guide whose duty is to test us through all sorts of discouraging experiences. Those who pick themselves up after defeat and keep on trying finally arrive, and the world says, "I knew you could do it." The hidden guide lets no one enjoy great achievement without passing the persistence test. Those who can't take it simply do not make the grade. Those who can take it are rewarded for their persistence, and in return they get the goal they are pursuing. But that is not all. They receive something infinitely more important than material compensation: the knowledge that every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. Persist past your failures. The people who learn from experience the importance of persistence will not accept defeat as being anything more than temporary. They are the ones whose desires are so persistently applied that defeat is finally changed into victory. We see that an overwhelmingly large number of people go down in defeat, never to rise again. We also see the few who take the punishment of defeat as an urge to greater effort. But what we do not see, what most of us never suspect of existing, is the silent but irresistible power that comes to the rescue of those who fight on in the face of discouragement. If we speak of this power at all, we call it persistence and let it go at that. One thing is sure: if you do not have persistence, you will not achieve noteworthy success in any calling. As I am writing these lines, I can look out the window and see, less than a block away, the great mysterious Broadway, the graveyard of dead hopes and the front porch of opportunity. From all over the world, people have come to Broadway seeking fame, fortune, power, love, or whatever it is that human beings call success. Once in a great while, someone steps out from the long procession of seekers, and the world hears that another person has conquered Broadway. But Broadway is not easily nor quickly conquered. Broadway acknowledges talent, recognizes genius, and pays off in money only after a person has refused to quit. The secret is always inseparably attached to one word: persistence. Editor's comments. Today we think of making it on Broadway in terms of the theater, but here Napoleon Hill uses Broadway as a metaphor for the New York arts, publishing, and entertainment industries in general. In the original edition of Think and Grow Rich, Hill used this introduction to tell of Fannie Hurst, one of the best-selling authors of the day, who pounded the streets of New York for 4 years and received 36 rejection slips from one publisher alone before her persistence paid off and she finally got published. Although Napoleon Hill chose Fannie Hurst to illustrate his point about overcoming poverty and adversity, he knew all about both from personal experience. Hill's own story is one of very humble beginnings and devastating failures that would have defeated most people. It was only through his extraordinary persistence that the original edition of the book you hold in your hands was published. And for that reason, the editors of this edition have included this brief biography of Napoleon Hill. The following is adapted from A Lifetime of Riches, the biography of Napoleon Hill, written by Michael J. Ritt Jr. and Kirk Landers, and also draws upon Napoleon Hill's first bestseller, his 4-volume masterwork, Law of Success. In it, Hill told of the 7 turning points in his own life, and those excerpts told in his words are told in the first person. Born into poverty in the backwoods of Virginia, young Nap, as he was called, was the local gun-toting troublemaker. He would probably have ended up a criminal had his widowed father not met and married Martha Ramey Banner. Nap's new stepmother set out to change the family's mountain ways, and she started by trading Napoleon a typewriter for his 6-shooter pistol. She told him, "If you become as good with a typewriter as you are with that gun, you may become rich and famous and known throughout the world." Her faith and encouragement turned young Nap around, and by the age of 15, he was submitting stories to the local newspapers and doing everything he could to get himself out of his meager circumstance. After completing high school and 1 year at a business college, he wrote an audacious letter to Rufus Ayers, one of the most powerful men in the coal industry. Hill wrote to apply for a job, but he said that he didn't want a salary. In fact, he said he would pay Ayers. Hill proposed that Ayers could charge him whatever he wanted on a monthly basis, but if at the end of 3 months Hill had proved his worth, he then would expect Ayers to pay him a salary of the same monthly amount. Ayers admired Hill's style and hired him, with pay. First turning point. After finishing a course at a business college, I took a job as stenographer and bookkeeper. As a result of having practiced the habit of performing more work and better work than that for which I was paid, I advanced rapidly until I was assuming responsibilities and receiving a salary far out of proportion to my age. Hill also proved to be so trustworthy and honest that Ayers promoted him to replace the manager, making this 19-year-old the youngest manager of a mine and in charge of 350 men. Then fate reached out and gave me a gentle nudge. My employer lost his fortune, and I lost my position. This was my first real defeat, and even though it came about as a result of causes beyond my control, I didn't learn a lesson from it until many years later. Second turning point. My next position was that of sales manager for a large lumber manufacturer in the South. My advancement was rapid, and I did so well that my employer took me into partnership with him. We began to make money, and I began to see myself on top of the world again. Like a stroke of lightning out of a clear sky, the 1907 panic swept down, and overnight it rendered me an enduring service by destroying our business and relieving me of every dollar that I had. Editor's comment. The panic Hill refers to began in the summer of 1907, when a number of banks and stock brokerages declared bankruptcy. Word spread to the general public and it created a run on the banks as depositors lined up to demand that they be given the money they had on deposit. Banks called in loans to meet the demand for cash, but those borrowers couldn't find buyers for their goods or property, so they couldn't pay back their loans. When the banks couldn't get back the money they had loaned, they repossessed the homes or businesses that the borrowers had put up as collateral. Businesses were closed, farmers were evicted from their land, jobs were lost, so even more banks were forced to close, and it just kept getting worse. America was caught in a downward spiral that was reversed only when the major Wall Street bankers and financial executives, who were themselves in danger of losing their businesses, stepped in to shore up troubled banks. It was in large part because of the bank panic of 1907 that legislation was enacted in 1913 to create the Federal Reserve System. This is the end of the editor's comments. Third turning point. This was my first serious defeat. I mistook it then for failure, but it was not. And before I complete this lesson, I will tell you why it was not. It required the 1907 panic and the defeat that it brought me to redirect my efforts from the lumber business to the study of law. I entered law school with a firm belief that I would emerge doubly prepared to catch up with the end of the rainbow and claim my pot of gold. Napoleon Hill planned to put himself and his brother through law school by writing articles for Bob Taylor's magazine. It was through the magazine that he arranged the fateful meeting with Andrew Carnegie, described at the beginning of this book. As was noted there, when Carnegie proposed the idea of writing The Philosophy of Success, he told Hill that he would have to earn his own way. I attended law school at night and worked as an automobile salesman during the day. Because of the job, I saw the need for trained automobile mechanics. I opened an educational department in the manufacturing plant and began to train ordinary machinists in automobile assembly and repair work. The school prospered, paying me over $1,000 a month in net profits. My banker knew that I was prospering, therefore he loaned me money with which to expand. A peculiar trait of bankers is that they will loan us money without any hesitation when we are prosperous. My banker loaned me money until I was hopelessly in his debt. Then he took over my business as calmly as if it had belonged to him, which it did. From an income of more than $1,000 a month, I was suddenly reduced to poverty. For the third time, Hill had experienced defeat, but he was not beaten. He got another job, and all the while continued to work on the Carnegie Project. Fourth turning point, 1912. Because my wife's family had influence, I secured the appointment as assistant to the chief counsel for one of the largest coal companies in the world. I was among friends and relatives, and I had a position that I could keep for as long as I wished without exerting myself. What more did I need? Nothing, I was beginning to say to myself. Then, without consultation with my friends and without warning, I resigned. This was the first turning point that was of my own selection. It was not forced upon me. I quit that position because the work was too easy and I was performing it with too little effort. This move proved to be the next most important turning point of my life, although it was followed by 10 years of effort that brought almost every conceivable grief the human heart can experience. I selected Chicago as my new field of endeavor. I made up my mind that if I could gain recognition in Chicago, in any honorable sort of work, it would prove that I had something that might be developed into real ability. Fifth turning point. My first position in Chicago was that of advertising manager for a large correspondence school. I did so well that the president of the school induced me to resign my position and go into the candy manufacturing business with him. We organized the Betsy Ross Candy Company, and I became its first president. The business grew rapidly, and soon we had a chain of stores in 18 different cities. They did so well, in fact, Hill's partners decided they wanted to take over the business. They had Hill arrested on a false charge, and then offered to withdraw the charge if he would turn over to them his interest in the business. Outraged at the suggestion, Hill refused. When the case went to court, his partners failed to appear for the hearing. Hill sued them for malicious damage to his character. The judge's ruling completely vindicated Hill and allowed him the option to have his partners thrown in jail. Being arrested seemed at the time a terrible disgrace, even though the charge was false. It was not a pleasant experience, and I would not wish to go through a similar experience again. But I must admit that it was worth all the grief it cost me, because it gave me the opportunity to find out that revenge was not a part of my makeup. Sixth turning point. This turning point came shortly after my dreams of success in the candy business had been shattered, when I turned my efforts to teaching advertising and salesmanship as a department of one of the colleges in the Midwest. My school prospered from the very beginning. I had a resident class and also a correspondence school through which I was teaching students in nearly every English-speaking country. It was 1917, and in April of that year, President Woodrow Wilson declared the United States would enter the